Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is walk up at the bus and look at the general condition of the bus, making sure it's not leaning one way or the other. Then I'm going to look underneath the bus. I'm looking for any puddles that might indicate there's a leak, antifreeze or oil, and there's none. I'm going to check my mirrors. I want to make sure they're firmly attached, they're reasonably clean, and they're not cracked. Checking my other mirror. Reasonably clean and not cracked. I want to check all of my lens covers. I'm checking to make sure they're not cracked. There's no water in there that would indicate that there's a problem, that maybe a screw is missing and it's come loose. My red, my amber are both no water, no cracks. My 3 clearance lights, no water, no cracks. And my amber and red on this side, no water and no cracks. Checking my turn signal, I can see that all the screws are in place. There's no cracks, there's no water in there. Checking here, this is intact. There's no cracks, no water. And the same on this side. No cracks, no water. And my turn signal here, the screws are all in place. There's no cracks and no water. I'm going to open my hood now, unfasten each side. Grab it in the center and pull it up. Listening for my click, and it clicks, so it's not going to fall on me. I'm going to check with my fluids. Right here, the yellow is where I check the engine oil. I would pull it out, wipe it off, reinsert it, pull it out, make sure it is above the add line. Here on the red is where I would check my transmission fluid. And again, I would do this according to manufacturer's recommendations, whether or not the engine should be running or not. And I would pull this dipstick out, wipe it off, reinsert it all the way, pull it out, make sure it's above the add line. Here is where I would check my power steering. There is a sight glass here, and I can see that it is in operating range. And there is also a dipstick on top if I wanted to crawl up there. I'm going to move around to the other side to continue to check my fluids. I'm going to check my washer fluid. There's an adequate amount there, but I'd be wanting to fill it pretty soon. And here I'm going to check my coolant and make sure that it is in operating range and does not need to have antifreeze added. While I'm on this side, I'm going to check my alternator belt. I'm looking to make sure it is not worn or frayed or dry rotted, and there's not more than 3/4 of an inch play. Looking behind my fan blade here, I'm going to check my water pump. I'm making sure all the bolts are in place, they're tight, there's no signs of any leakage there. While I'm here, I'm also going to look at my hoses to make sure there's no bulges, no leaks, and they're firmly attached. And I'm also going to look at my wiring to make sure that it's neatly bundled and there's nothing hanging down indicating there could be a problem. On this side, my air compressor is located down here. The air compressor is gear driven off the engine, so there is no belt for us to check. And along here I can see my frame. I'm looking to make sure there's no broken welds, no bends, or any damage of any kind. While I'm here also, I'm going to continue to check the rest of my hoses to make sure they're firmly attached, there's no bulges, no leaks, and looking at any wiring to make sure it is neatly bundled and there's nothing hanging down or loose. I'm going to start with my steering here. Checking my steering linkage to make sure there's not too much play in that. Looking at my steering box or gearbox, I want to make sure it's firmly bolted to the frame. The bolts are here. There's no damage and no cracks. My hoses coming off of my steering box are firmly attached. There's no bubbles in them. There's no leaking. Checking my pitman arm. I'm checking to make sure it's firmly attached to my steering box or gearbox and that the cotter pin is in place. From the pitman arm, I'm going to look at the drag link. I want to make sure that it is not bent or damaged and that the cotter key is in place here. I'm going to check the suspension now. Checking my leaf springs. I want to make sure that they are all there. They have not shifted and they are not broken. At each end of the stack of leaf springs are my spring hangers. I want to make sure that my spring hangers are firmly bolted to the frame and they're not cracked or damaged. In the center of the stack are my U-bolts. I want to make sure that the nuts are on the bottom and that they are tight. And then here is my shock. I want to make sure that it is firmly attached, it's not damaged, and it's not leaking. This is the air line coming into the brake chamber from the air storage tank. I want to make sure that air line is firmly attached and it is not damaged or leaking. The brake chamber, I also want to make sure it is firmly attached, it's not dented or damaged or leaking. Coming out of the brake chamber is my push rod attaching to my slack adjuster. I'm going to grab that in the front and pull forward, and I want to make sure there's not more than 1 inch of play there. Looking behind here, I would want to look at the brake drum. I want to make sure there's no large cracks or rust trails, and I would also want to check my brake linings to make sure they're not worn or dangerously thin. And the other is inflation. Break down to the sidewalls. Inflation, you would inflate it to whatever it says on the side of the tire, which is 105 pounds here. If there was any question, you would check that with a tire gauge. The rim is located behind this fancy rim cover, so we're not actually seeing the rim, but if it was damaged or bent, this cover would not adhere to it properly, and it is firmly attached. Our lug nuts are located behind these lug nut covers. So if any of the lug nuts were missing, there would be nothing for the covers to hang on to. So we know they're all there, and we can check to make sure that they are all tight. And our hub oil seal is located behind this hub cap. If the hub oil seal were leaking, there would be signs of that leakage coming around here. And there is none. Here with this mirror, I want to make sure it's firmly attached. It's reasonably clean and there's no cracks in it. I'm going to move on here to the door. I want to make sure that it opens and closes smoothly. I'm going to check my seals, make sure they're not dry rotted. I'm going to check my glass to make sure it's not cracked or damaged. As I go down the side of the bus, I'm going to check all of my reflective tape to make sure that it is intact down the side of the bus and around the emergency exits. I'll also be checking all of my lens covers to make sure they're not cracked and there's no water in them. And I'll be looking for my reflectors to make sure they are in place and they're not cracked or damaged. If I were to crawl under the bus, I would check the air lines that are coming back from the air compressor to our 2 air storage tanks under here. I would want to make sure that the air lines were not damaged, they were not leaking, and they were firmly attached. Our 2 air storage tanks, I would want to make sure as well that they are firmly attached, mounted, they're not leaking, and these air storage tanks have both automatic and manual drains to drain the oil and the water. Then from the air storage tanks, air lines go out to each axle. I would also check those air lines to make sure that they're firmly attached, they're not leaking or damaged. And those air lines come back in here to this dual brake chamber. There are 2 in the rear. One is for the service brake and one is for the spring brake. If I were to crawl under there, I could check to make sure they're firmly attached, they're not dented or leaking. While I was under there, I would also check the push rod coming out and slack adjuster to make sure there's not more than 1 inch of play. While I'm under there, I would want to check in the back my brake drum to make sure there's no large cracks or rust trails, and also the brake linings to make sure they're not worn or dangerously thin. If I look through here, I can see the drive shaft, I want to make sure it's attached firmly. There's no soot and no holes. And on the other side of the drive shaft, of the exhaust system, I can see the drive shaft. I want to make sure that the drive shaft is not bent or damaged and there's nothing caught in it. So on this side, first I see the exhaust system, and then just to the other side of it, I would see the drive shaft. Again, I want to make sure that I check my reflectors as I come down. This one is intact. My reflective tape is intact around my emergency exits. My clearance light lens cover is not cracked and there's no water in it. Coming back to my tires, there are three things I need to check on my tires. I need to check my condition, my inflation, and tread depth. On rear tires, I have to have a minimum of 2/32 on my tread depth, and this has more than adequate. If there was any question about it, I could use a tread depth gauge. My condition refers to even wear across the tires and also checking the sidewalls to make sure that there's no damage. And my inflation, I would inflate it to whatever it says on the side of the tire, which is 105 pounds, and I would confirm that with an air gauge. I want to check my stack of leaf springs back here to make sure they're all there, they haven't shifted, and none of them are broken. On each end of the stack are the spring hangers. I want to make sure that they are firmly attached to the frame. They're not cracked or damaged. While I was under there, I would check my shock to make sure it's firmly attached and it's not leaking, and also my U-bolts, which would be directly behind my dual tires, to make sure they are firmly attached and the nuts are on the bottom. I also want to check the length of my frame. I'm checking for any broken welds, bends, or any damage to the frame. And that is my suspension system. Now, on the dual tires here, I want to check in between the dual tires to make sure there's nothing caught in there, a rock, a ball. And on this particular bus, there are no spacers in between the tires. My rim is located behind this rim cover. If it were bent or damaged, this rim cover would not adhere properly, and it is on there tightly. Down here are the lug nut covers. So my lug nuts are all there because the covers are all here. And I can check to make sure they're tight. And in the center is my axle seal located behind this hubcap. If the axle seal were leaking, it would be showing around the edge of this hubcap. As I come back here, I'm going to check my splash guard or mud flaps. I want to make sure they're firmly attached and they're not torn or damaged. Continuing to check my reflective tape. I'm back at the fueling area. I'm going to check my door to make sure it operates properly. I'm going to check to make sure that my fuel cap is there and it's tight. And I'm going to check the fuel lines to make sure as they come down that there's no signs of any leakage. Continuing to move down and check our reflective tape. Our reflector is here and it is intact. And checking our clearance light here, the lens cover is intact. Coming around to the back, I'm going to check the operation of my rear door. I want to open it, make sure it opens smoothly, it stays open, and I can close it. Need to check all of my lens covers. My amber, my red, I want to look for any signs of water or cracks. There are none. My clearance lights, no water, no cracks. And my amber and red lights on this side, no cracks, no water. And I'm checking all of my lens covers and my reflectors to make sure they are all intact. No cracks, no water. My tailpipe is here. I'm looking to make sure there's nothing caught up in it. It's flush with the bumper, and then I'm checking my tow hooks here. I want to make sure that they are firmly attached, which they are. On this side, to check my batteries. They're located in the battery compartment. There are 3 of them on this tray, and my tray is secure with this pin. And I'm looking for any signs of corrosion, which there is none. And I want to check my stop sign. I want to make sure it's firmly attached. The screws are in place. My lens covers are intact. There is no water. And it is definitely firmly attached.